Hey everybody, I don't normally do live streams on Facebook. In fact, I don't think I've ever done one, or maybe one or two in all the times I've been on this platform. But I just feel that I have to say something, and I think it's fairly urgent because I think it's something that can potentially affect everybody. If you haven't yet seen the news, you'll know that the Russian government have put their nuclear deterrent on high alert in response to what they consider to be threatening statements and actions by NATO member states. So I don't have to tell you how serious this is. If you're a serious person, you take the world seriously, you'll know that this is serious. But if you think this is just a game and this is all just a media illusion, then go ahead and take your blue pill or your handful of blue pills, put them in your mouth and wash them down with something nice, because this video message is not for you. I can't help you. This is not a game. And what you're seeing happening now, what is unfolding now, is the culmination of the absolute degradation of our political spheres, our media spheres, over a course of many years, okay? This is the culmination of that. This is what we get. This is the cost of that. This is the cost of everybody being ignorant. This is the cost of nobody speaking out when the mainstream media have been publishing provable falsehoods at every single juncture of every single conflict for decades. And they've been allowed to get away with it. And our politicians have been allowed to lie on the floor of Congress, in the House of Commons, at the United Nations, to stand up there and lie to the world. And they're doing it over and over and over again. So we just spent 2 years being gaslit by our governments about a, quote, global pandemic, and being made to be locked in our homes, deprived of work. They have inflated our currency, devalued our currency by basically just printing money and literally throwing it out the window to their friends to pay for obscene amounts of vaccine stocks and PPE and furlough money and paying businesses and well-connected companies with COVID relief and so forth. And now we're seeing the results of this. It's hyperinflation. That's a direct result of this free-for-all for the last 2 years, including your fuel prices and everything else. Supply chain, quote, disruptions. This didn't happen on its own. This wasn't an act of God. This was a man-made series of events, okay? We've just endured 2 years of this. 2 years of being told, oh, you have to take an experimental pharmaceutical product or you're not going to be able to have a job. You can't earn money. You can't go into shop or a restaurant. You can't travel. The same government and media who engineered this ridiculous, unnecessary, overblown, hysterical situation that went global for the last 2 years, these same politicians, these same mainstream media outlets are now telling you that Russia is your enemy and you need to hate Russia, you need to punish Russians, you need to destroy the economy of that country and teach them a lesson. Why? What did Russia do to America? There's pundits coming every 2 seconds onto US mainstream media, and they're saying, we need to punish the Russians. They mean us harm. Russia is our enemy. What has Russia ever done to the United States of America? What? Nothing. Nothing. What has the United States of America and its NATO allies done to Russia? They've attempted to destroy their economy, destabilize their government, violate NATO promises that were made by numerous Western leaders over a course of many years that NATO would not move eastward and encircle Russia and therefore threaten its own national security interests. And we're told that Russia has done us harm. We've been told that Russia interfered with our elections, that Russia elected Donald Trump. More than half of the people in the United States of America believe that Russia interfered in the 2016 elections. They've been conditioned to hate the Russians and everything about Russians, and Vladimir Putin did this and Vladimir Putin did that. 100% lies. And Russia did not hack the DNC. There's no evidence for that either, and the list goes on and on. All fabrications. It's all coming out in the wash now. Hillary Clinton herself fabricated evidence that Donald Trump was linked to a Russian bank. The Durham report, the evidence is there. Is the media talking about it? No, there's a convenient distraction underway to gaslight everybody. It was all made up, it was fake, it was political, it was designed to prepare you for what you're seeing now. The West has baited Russia, they've sanctioned them, they've overthrown governments in their neighboring countries, like Ukraine. And they want you to think that, no, don't forget about all that context, forget about the history, forget about the fact that we have armed, trained, and backed neo-Nazi, far-right, paramilitary militias and our allies in Ukraine. This is what the government is upset about. And 14,000 people have died in the Donbass, that's Donetsk and Lugansk in eastern Ukraine, in a very bloody civil war since 2014. After the coup, that initiated a civil war. And then you have an ethnic Russian enclave in the east being persecuted. The military's been deployed to attack them. They called them all terrorists. 4 million people in the Donbass, and they've been depersoned and canceled by the Western media. This is what the Minsk peace process was for. The UN passed a resolution 2202, and everybody agreed to pursue the Minsk peace accords. The job of Germany and France they had only one job, is to get Kiev and the government in Ukraine to ratify the Minsk accords. 7 years, and they did nothing. They dragged their heels, and of course, Kiev's position was openly that we won't do this. Did you ever hear about that in the Western media? Did you ever hear a word about that? No. Have you heard all of the grandstanding politicians? Have they even mentioned this? No. This was the UN mandate. Everybody's turned their back on it. Why? And now they're blaming Russia for somehow failing in the Minsk peace process. That's the opposite of what happened. So our politicians are standing up and lying to our face right now. So from Russia's point of view, the world has abandoned the United Nations resolution. They've abandoned the human rights atrocities in the Donbass. 14,000 dead soldiers, mostly civilians, hundreds of children, civilians being shelled by the Ukrainian army, and radical militias. Is that not a human rights violation? Is that not a crime against humanity? Taking out electrical grids, taking out the water supply, blockading food deliveries. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This is exactly what the United States, its allies, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been doing in Yemen for the last 7 years. Have you seen any outrage in the Western media about this? No, it's genocide. It's genocide in Yemen. It's attempted genocide in eastern Ukraine. It's the same thing that has been done to the Palestinians. It's the same thing that our governments have been trying to do to the country of Syria. And you see a familiar pattern developing here. And what's our reaction to that? We sanction them. We sanction Syria. Why? For defending their country against thousands and thousands of radical Islamist, jihadist, terrorist fighters armed by the United States and its allies including the UK, including France, and the list goes on. Channeling weapons into Syria to create a long, protracted civil war. Does that sound familiar? What's happening in Ukraine now? Everybody's announcing they're sending weapons into Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, a comedian, an actor who played the president on a sitcom 2 years ago, decided to run for president as a protest move, as a joke. He ends up getting elected. What does that tell you about the political state and the state of society in a country like Ukraine? It's far from serious in terms of how things are being managed, even at a government level. So you've got a comedian who's president calling on mercenaries from around the world to come and fight against the Russians, passing out guns to civilians. After getting billions of dollars in military aid from the United States and NATO member states, our best special forces, training and advising the Ukrainian forces. If that was the case, why does they need to go and announce to anybody and everybody just to show up and come and join and fight? Not a very good look. It's not a serious government. It never was. And what kind of a government would deploy the full force of its military to attack an ethnic group in the east of its country because of ethnic reasons or whatever the reasons are? At that point, it's a failed government. It's a failed state. It came to power in a violent coup in 2014. The current regime, this President Zelensky, Poroshenko, Yatsenyuk, etc., came to power in a violent coup backed by the United States of America. This is historical fact. It was engineered. The evidence is overwhelming. Everybody who's looked at this knows that. Yet you won't hear this mentioned once by anyone in our mainstream media right now. No politician will dare to even utter that. And the President of the United States, Joe Biden, was vice president at the time, and he and his family made a fortune out of the corruption in Ukraine. They took advantage of this corrupt environment, and they padded their own pockets. Joe Biden was effectively running a racket. He threatened the government that they wouldn't get over $1 billion in loan guarantees unless they fired the prosecutor that was investigating his son. Now, what level of corruption is this? It has never been seen before. And it's done out in the open. How is this allowed to happen? Because our mainstream media have made a concerted decision not to pursue certain stories for partisan reasons. That is a level of corruption that we have never seen before. When you have a press that partisan, then the press is dysfunctional. It no longer fulfills its public service. It is no longer the fourth estate. It is therefore redundant. It is therefore an accessory to any of the high crimes that we're witnessing now. So if this leads to war, if this escalates to a nuclear war, that's the cost. That's the cost of everybody who has been ignorant, who's thought it's not important to, taking sides like it's a sporting event. This is not a sporting event. And you have to understand that our forefathers, even 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, had much more respect for the offices which they held, for their electorate, for their counterparts in other countries. When they came to the table to do diplomacy, there was some respect. And I would imagine at some point there was a lot more than what we have today. Our leaders are not serious. They'll stand up there and they'll just lie and tell lies upon lies. They're on Fox News every 5 minutes doing it. They're on CNN every 5 minutes doing it. They're on the BBC doing it. These are not serious people. They're not telling the truth. They're intentionally obfuscating important context that would change the entire narrative. And instead of coming clean with the public, They're putting pressure on social media companies like Facebook, who we're on right now, this platform, Twitter, to stamp out, quote, misinformation. They're doing it now. They did it they had a field day with COVID and their pharmaceutical gravy train with the jabs, okay, in censoring and deplatforming thousands and thousands of people. They're doing it again with Ukraine, with this situation. It's not misinformation that they want to stamp out. It's truth, which they want to stamp out. They want to stamp facts out. They want to stamp context out, because they say anything that undermines the confidence in our democratic institutions. Anybody who is censoring, or government's putting pressure on people to censor, that's not a democratic institution anymore. That's an authoritarian regime. Okay, they're behaving like authoritarians and wagging their finger at Russia like they're the world's worst totalitarian. Okay, so if you want to understand why things are happening the way they are, you need to look at history. And you need to look at what Western governments have done to bring the situation to where it is now. It didn't happen. It's not. Vladimir Putin didn't wake up one morning and say, "I'm going to invade Ukraine." But that's what your mainstream media want you to think. This is how you've been gaslit. And they're telling you now that blood is being spilt on European soil. And that's never happened. And the peace in Europe has stood for 70, 80 years or whatever. That's a complete lie. The United States bombed a sovereign country, a UN member state, Yugoslavia, for 74 straight days. Okay? In the late 1990s, they bombed a sovereign country for 74 straight days. They killed a lot of people. They dismembered the country. Okay, that is NATO. That's the United States, Britain, and its allies in the heart of Europe. Actually, in Europe, not in Eurasia, in Europe. Not a problem, apparently. Not a problem. They even carved out a statelet, a new country, a few new countries, but one in particular, Kosovo, which hasn't been recognized by all of its neighbors. And yet they're screaming that the independence of the Donbass, Donetsk, and Lugansk is some sort of violation of international law and a violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. No, it's not. Read the UN Charter. The UN Charter is specific. If your own government has deployed the army against your people, a specific ethnic group, is blockading and embargoing you, you defend your territory, you organize your own government, and you have your major neighbors are recognizing your existence, then you automatically qualify, or you're a very long way along the road to qualifying for legal statehood under international law. Have you ever heard this analysis from the mainstream media? No, you haven't. All the experts, all the foreign policy experts on television, no, you haven't. All you hear is they're Russian-backed separatists. That's all you hear. They want to reduce your worldview down to Russia bad, everybody else good. Job done. And then you will back a war. You will even get behind your government for a world war. One day in their twisted minds, they'll even try to gaslight you to think that somehow that this is some morally just cause, that we're doing this in the name of democracy. The Ukraine is not a liberal democracy. It never was. Maybe it was for a period of time. But after the coup that we backed in 2014, any government that persecutes any ethnic, 1/3 of their population, I'm not sure what the numbers were, and you attack them, you call them all terrorists, you attack them, you refuse to negotiate with them, you outlaw their political parties, you close down their television stations, you nearly make the language Russian illegal in the country for all intents and purposes, okay? That's not a liberal democracy. On the democracy index, Ukraine is something like 84th out of 168 or 164. It's not very good. It's not very good. That's not to say anybody's perfect, but you know what? It's not very high on the democracy index. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. So this is a country that has been torn apart by civil war, and I will venture to say, and I'm probably correct, that that civil war would not have happened if not for the direct intervention by the United States government, its State Department-funded NGOs, and Soros-funded NGOs, who are all instrumental in orchestrating a violent coup of a democratically elected president in Ukraine. Because the West didn't like that president, because that president wanted to sign a common trade agreement with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, rather than go exclusively with the European Union. As soon as he decided not to go exclusively with the EU, the coup was launched. Is that a coincidence? Of course not. Of course not. Have we overthrown governments before in the West? Yes, we have. How many? I can't even count that high. I need the list in front of me. So to gaslight you, to think that this time they're telling the truth, this time they're not lying to you, this time it's a righteous cause for democracy. Change your Facebook profiles and put a Ukrainian flag up there, or before it was what? It was whatever the cause du jour is. Okay? They want people to basically follow whatever this narrative is, like lemmings, and also to believe that sanctions, when you apply sanctions, that there's no harm done, that that's the peaceful options. Sanctions are an act of war. They should be taken dead seriously. But you've been conditioned, everybody's been conditioned in the West to think that, oh, sanctions are better than deploying the military. You know, we can cut off a country's economic access to the world, its finances. We can destroy its economy, and that's good. That's better than a shooting war. And we'll teach them, and they'll change their behavior if we just sanction them hard enough. No, it's never worked. It's never worked, okay? Sanctions do not work if the target of the sanctions believes that the person imposing the sanctions will hurt them in the future or at a later time. And they definitely don't work if you sanction them before they actually do something. And that's what our governments did to Russia this past week. When Russia recognized the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, we cried murder and went hysterical and sanctioned half of the Russian parliament and a whole bunch of other institutions because they recognized two new independent entities. Recognizing a new independent state is not against international law. It's not a violation of anybody's territorial integrity at all. It is merely a political position that you are recognizing a new and independent state. And they sanctioned them. And that was the stupidest move that our geniuses in Washington and London and the rest of the glad-handers in the EU, who clearly don't have a clue how the world works, and there's proof, this is proven now, they don't really have a clue. They are delusional on a good day, okay? If you you punish someone before they've actually done something, then you're basically telling them that, well, you might as well go ahead and execute whatever you think you need to do because they're going to do it anyway. They've already done it. You take away any incentive or political leverage by doing this ahead of time. And ditto for threatening people as well. If you threaten someone publicly for a period of months or years, generally you're going to get that behavior which you claim to have not wanted to see happen. This is a classic situation which our governments have just basically created through their own diplomatic malfeasance. Okay, sanctions are crippling on the economy, on the people. It is collective punishment. It doesn't punish the government or the elites because no matter what state the country's in, the government still has to put on their suits and go to work in the morning. They still need security. They still need a military, and you need to have certain things, a police force and so forth, to have a functioning state. The people who suffer when there's sanctions by the West are working people, working class people and middle class people. The rationale of the US government and its allies is to collectively punish the population so that they'll rise up and overthrow the leader that they don't like, that the West doesn't like. And they're openly stating this is their intention: rise up and overthrow your president. This is what our politicians in the United States are saying on mainstream media right now every 5 minutes. And they said the same thing with Syria. They said the same thing with Iran. They said the same thing with Libya. They say the same thing with Yugoslavia. And the list goes on. It's collective punishment. It is itself a violation of international law. Sanctions used in a punitive fashion as collective punishment is a violation of international law, is an act of war. How did World War II begin on the Pacific Front? Japan was sanctioned. They were cut off from the international system. They were kept from being able to buy or sell important commodities. They were backed into a corner, and to the point where they felt they had no choice but to do something drastic in order to survive. And that was Pearl Harbor in 1941, okay? That happened. That's history. That's predictable behavior. So this hysterical collective insanity that we need to destroy Russia because it's protecting the people of the Donbass and it's wanting to get rid of basically the neo-Nazi far-right factions who have been committing war crimes in the Donbass, in Odessa, and other places. Now, you can debate on whether that's the right way to go about it. Certainly, I would say, yeah, we could have a debate about that for sure, okay? But if the international community is doing nothing and the U.S. is backing those radical neo-Nazi fascist elements in Ukraine, using them for regime change, using them to divide and rule the country, the United States is actively doing that. And they've been doing that for years. For years. There's a good film by Oliver Stone called Ukraine on Fire. Watch it. It's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. There's a number of good documentaries. This is well documented, okay? The United States always backs the radicals, and then they use them to fight proxy wars. Ukraine is a proxy war. NATO is fighting Russia. It's a proxy war. They're using the Ukrainians as their proxy. They're flooding weapons in there, just like they did with Syria, and now inviting foreigners to come in and fight, including who knows who's going to show up for that. So they don't want peace. Washington waxes lyrical. NATO countries wax lyrical. If you wanted peace, you wouldn't be pumping weapons into a war zone. You'd be calling for some sort of negotiations or diplomacy. You'd be pulling out all the stops, okay? But I don't believe that that's what the West wants. I believe the West wants to see a long war. They want to get the images on the television of the whatever the image of the day is, and you see the same image of the child or whatever on every single newspaper, the same game that they played in Syria to demonize Bashar al-Assad. Send in the white helmets, they'll probably show up as well in Ukraine. Who knows, okay? So this has been mischaracterized from the beginning. There are fake news stories coming out every minute now on the mainstream media about all sorts of things. And Russia's targeting residential apartment blocks. Nobody's investigated what actually happened there. By the looks of the contrail, it looks like a Buk missile launcher. Who has Buk missile launchers? Ukrainian military in that area. Could very easily have been a misfire. It doesn't matter. No investigation needed. They have a narrative. Russia's attacking civilians, even though it's not in their interest to do so. This reminds me so much of Syria. The propaganda onslaught, the full court press, for years, the amount of resources and our money that they plowed into making that war go on forever, okay? They've destroyed that country. They've dismembered that country. The United States is still occupying northeast Syria, stealing all the oil, selling it for cash on the market, and using it to fund extremists. They've been doing this for years. No outrage from our media, no big speeches, no sanctions. Where do we start? Where do we start? This is beyond ridiculous, and this is all of these lies compounded. NATO invoking Article 5 after 9/11, claiming that Afghanistan attacked the United States. Afghanistan doesn't even have a standing army. How could you invoke the North Atlantic Treaty, Article 5? They did. The rest is history. 20 years occupying Afghanistan and then leaving in the most humiliating fashion. Iraq. I didn't even mention Iraq. What was that all about? Where are the sanctions against the U.S. and Britain for lying their way into a war, for killing upwards of 1 million people? A blight on humanity. That event was and continues to be. Iraq is still in horrendous condition. The damage we'll never see it fixed in our lifetime. That was our government who lied their way into that, and they sucked as much money and resources, and everyone got rich out of it. Everyone virtue signaled at the beginning. Do you remember? Do you remember how the media was there to support that big fraud every step of the way? And they kept doing it for years. And now they look back saying, well, maybe it was a bad idea. Maybe it was a bad idea. Libya. Our media told us that Gaddafi was planning a genocide in Benghazi and we needed to act now, and NATO needed to institute a no-fly zone. Our media told us, Susan Rice told us, President Obama's cabinet member, that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra to his soldiers to go and rape the women of Libya. That was a total lie. Fake news, the same type of fake news we're seeing now. They're telling us now on Reuters that the Russians, that the radiation levels have risen at Chernobyl since the Russians have got near it. They're inferring that the Russians have turned up the Chernobyl radiation. I'm going to bet this is just fake news. Why is this on the major mainstream media news wires? Can this possibly be true? I doubt it. I doubt it. There's tons of these fake stories coming out, endless. And we're going to see more of these. And they want you to say, oh, they're handing out guns to the Ukrainians, that the brave citizens defending their country. They're handing out guns willy-nilly in Kiev. Guess what's already happening today? There's rival factions shooting at each other now, accusing the other side of being Russian saboteurs. There's another level of a civil war now that's come as a result of the West encouraging President Zelensky to hand out guns to everyone and anyone to, quote, protect the city from Russia, even though Russia's announced that they're not interested in any of the civilian areas, okay? So, and not only that, send in the mercenaries. Send Blackwater in. Send who knows jihadists in. They'll, pay them a couple of $100 a week, and they'll show up. They'll show up. They'll come from Syria, from Turkey. I'm sure there'll be quite a few of those en route as we speak. Here we go again. How did that work out in Syria? How much money did the U.S. and the U.K. government spend pumping weapons and supporting extremists, terrorists, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria for 10 years? How did that go? How did that go? Was that really productive? Was that a good way to blow away $30 or $40 billion of Western public money? Good investment? Well, I guess it's a good investment if you're in a certain type of a business. Then it's been very good. It's excellent. They lied about the chemical weapons attacks. Completely fake, staged, provably staged in most cases. And they use that as a justification for mounting airstrikes against Syria. Sanctions are still on Syria. We're occupying their oil fields. They have a fuel shortage. This is an act of war. We're still waging war in Syria. Yemen, same thing. That's genocide. Where's the outrage? Where's the virtue signaling? Why don't we all put Yemeni flags on our Facebook profiles? Let's have some solidarity with the poor Yemenis. No, because you can only have solidarity and you can only virtue signal to the groups that you're instructed to by your media, by social media, by Silicon Valley, by your government, by your influencers. They'll tell you who you need to virtue signal for and who you should be in solidarity with. And it has nothing to do with the facts on the ground. Nothing at all. So if this did escalate to some kind of a nuclear standoff, at that point, you really have to realize that our elected leaders who we're paying and who are in charge of, who are supposed to, be keeping the world safe, if they allowed things to get to this point, then they've failed. They failed miserably, okay? If their only solution is to flood Ukraine with weapons, they failed. Who's going to use those weapons? Half the weapons they've given them already have already been blown up by the Russian military. The warehouses up in smoke. Was that a good investment? No, it was a waste. But somebody got paid, didn't they? Yes, the weapons manufacturers, they got paid. Their share prices went up. Anytime our governments announce that we're going to be giving weapons of whatever description, the company that supplies those weapons, their share prices go up. Their investors get bigger dividends. They get paid. The CEOs get bonuses. They take some of that money and they go back to Washington and they lobby for more of their foreign policy interests, or they put that money into think tanks that tell our senators and our congressmen that we need to hate Russia, or that we need to hate Syria, or that we need to hate and destroy and whatever, Iran, for instance. That's how this system works. That's how Washington works. It's completely corrupt. It's totally bankrupt, and it's bankrupting us. After what's happened, the economic devastation that was imposed on all of our countries by our governments because of what they said was COVID, the last thing you need to do right now is to be throwing money out the window for weapons and to start a new arms race. But that's exactly what they're doing right now, and this is what they're going to try to gaslight you into backing and getting behind that effort. So you could see shortages of fuel. That's not out of the realms of possibility. That could happen on Monday. And we're already used to being locked down, so we've already been prepared for this. They've already done the beta run for this. I wrote an article about this in August in New Dawn magazine saying exactly this. We've already been prepped for a world war. Airspace has already been closed. Borders have already been shut. Shortages have already become the norm. Supply chains have already been disrupted. Those are the things that happen when there's a war. It's already happened. The systems are already in place. Censorship, shutting down media, shutting down RT, shutting down Press TV, so that no other information from a war zone can make it to the West. Then the Western media have a monopoly on the information, on the narrative. And they can count on Silicon Valley will censor anything else that's moving around on the social media sphere. Does that sound like that's outlandish? No, it happened. It already happened. They have the tools. They've constructed the framework for this, to manage this. Okay? So it's not a game. It's not a game. But I'm telling you, we do not have serious people in politics. They're lying to us every minute, and with no compunction whatsoever. It's truly breathtaking. And the media are completely an accomplice to that. They should be challenging our elected officials. They should have done that over COVID. They should have done that with the emergency use pharmaceutical products, but they did nothing. They did nothing, and they'll do nothing with this. I don't think they're going to reform. These people, these institutions, they're beyond the pale. So that's a very dangerous situation, and that means that we could potentially get to a point which we're arriving at right now. So let's hope that some intelligence creeps in, some real intelligence, some common sense, a little bit of sobriety with our political class, that they don't do anything really, really stupid like they've done already, and then denying it, and then lying about it, and then lying to us, and then accusing somebody else of doing what they themselves have been doing for years. This has to stop. This has to stop, because what's coming down the pipeline, if we allow this to continue, it's not good for anybody. There's going to be no winners, despite when they start beating their chest and puffing their chest out and festooning around the experts, the military experts. They're experts in nothing. They're experts in nothing. They're experts in screwing things up, which they've been doing for years. Instead of having a little bit of humility, instead of acting a little more professional, have some discipline themselves, they have to create crazy situations through their own efforts, then to create a situation that justifies their existence of their institutions. NATO is a perfect example of this. But yet here we are. Maybe it's unavoidable. Maybe this is just human nature. But it's not a game. It's not a game. Get informed. I'm going to go live for the Sunday Wire in about 9 minutes. 21st Century Wire. There's a link below on our Facebook feed here. We've got a fantastic guest coming on. We're going to be talking about this and other issues. So we'll continue the conversation there. But thanks for joining us on this rare live stream. Take care, everybody.